Basically, the aircraft had gone into out of control flight. It was stuck in a dive at the ocean. And 2 seconds before impact with the ocean, I just remember the ground rush of the ocean coming up at me, just filling the canopy and making it very clear that there's no other way out of this thing. Just that sinking feeling in my stomach, that deep sense of dread, like, oh shit.
Welcome to Mindset Lessons from the Field. I'm Gina Cazaza, the author of the upcoming memoir, Training with the SEAL. Today's guest was a U.S. Navy fighter pilot. He was forced to eject into the sound barrier as his plane was going down during a training exercise over the Atlantic Ocean. In the process of ejecting, he sustained catastrophic injuries that literally ripped his limbs apart, along with a severe traumatic brain injury. His body landed in the ice-cold waters of the Atlantic with a protective dry suit that has been ripped to pieces. With his parachute still attached and unable to move his arms, he was continuously dunked into the freezing water for 2 hours before his rescue. Luckily, his hypothermic condition kept him from bleeding to death. He spent the following months focusing on his recovery, and despite his catastrophic injuries, he was eventually able to score a perfect PFT and was able to return to flight duty. He recently published the book, Phoenix Revival, about his experience and long journey through recovery. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm so excited to introduce you to Kegan Gill. Kegan, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thanks for having me on, Gina.
I am so excited. Your story is what an unbelievable story that you got. And, I know I briefly gave, the gist of it, but I really want to just get into the mindset of this whole entire thing from the start of the ejection to where you are now, and throughout the book, the things that you talk about and you share with people. So let's start with that day, right? And what happened and that moment. And I want to know, in that moment of ejection, right? What was going through your mind when you had to do that? And I mean, do you even mentally process that? Or, it's like a life or death decision right there, right? Nobody's done what you've done.
Yeah, I have a clear linear memory up until the moment that I basically reached for that ejection handle between my legs. So basically the aircraft had gone into out of control flight. It was stuck in a dive at the ocean. And 2 seconds before impact with the ocean, I just remember the ground rush of the ocean coming up at me, just filling the canopy and making it very clear that there's no other way out of this thing. And just that sinking feeling in my stomach, that deep sense of dread, like, oh shit. And from there on, it was like the training kicked in and it was just reactionary. I didn't have the time to contemplate, what's this going to do to my body? It was just a very straightforward, either you pull the ejection handle or you're going to be dead in 2 seconds. So fortunately I did. And from there on out, for the next several weeks, my memory was non-linear anymore. There's been flashbacks that I've gotten back throughout, but most of what we've recovered and how I tell this story is from the investigation that really put all the pieces back together from my fragmented memory.
Do you remember being in the ocean and fighting, to not drown? Because from what I've learned, it's like that parachute was really weighing down, and that person that went to go and save you was also getting dragged down from the parachute. So do you remember any of that part?
I do. I remember it. The way I got that back in my memory was largely through, over the course of years, I really struggled with night terrors. So I'd be trying to get sound sleep, and as soon as I would go into a dream state, I'd be back in that, and I'd be back in the emotions of it, and this just overwhelming sense of terror and dread. As for anybody who's ever been held under the water when you need a breath of air, you know how terrible that feeling is, where you're starting to, as you hold your breath for so long, you start to spasm, and your lungs will start to inhale the water involuntarily. And that's where I was in and out of. And in the back of my mind also, to add to the terror of that moment, was I knew I was bleeding out. I knew my body was paralyzed. And I also knew that there was a huge great white shark right in that area because prior to the flight,
Mm.
my friend Fisty, as a joke, put up the shark tracker app and put all these GPS tagged sharks that are, no kidding, real sharks out there
Mm.
that have been tagged for research purposes. And he penned those all on the whiteboard showing what working areas we're going to be utilizing that day out over the Atlantic Ocean off the coast of Virginia Beach. And it just so happened there was this 16-foot, 3,500-pound great white shark named Mary Lee right under. And we were joking about that like an hour before this all went down. And so now that's in my mind, like as I'm being drowned and bleeding out, like
Bleeding, yeah.
any moment, I was terrified of Jaws when my parents let me watch it when I was like 6 years old,
Oh,
probably a little
God.
early. And there was just a lot of terror and just, I don't know how I managed to hold on. And I remember going in and out of that consciousness but eventually they got to me.
Just hearing it puts me in a terror, like, first of all, I'm terrified of the water, even though I love going in it. There's this huge fear, right? And I don't know what's underneath me. And then to
Mhm.
think, I know that there's this great white, there might be others, but I definitely know there's this one. I'm bleeding. I can't breathe, right? Like there is just, I just, I can't, and props to holding on because I just would have been like, just out of pure terror, I think would have been like, just take me now. I just, it's mind blowing to me that that you were able to go through it. And, now they come to rescue you. There's so much chaos going on because no one's communicating properly. And you then get to the hospital, you wake up, right? And there's the reality of like, first of all, you lost a lot of days. You don't know what's happening. You don't know where you are, all that stuff, right? And not only that, but then there's this whole new reality of who you are because of what happened. Like what can I do? What can't I do, right? What happened to the career and that, that
Mhm.
identity that you're so tied to. Um and I want to know like what what was going on through your mind during that wake up, if you could recall, and all that stuff? And then talk to us about that first spark of resilience where you were like, I'm gonna fight back.
At first, it was just really confusing. I had
I
been in
mean,
a comatose state for a 2-week period, and so between the head injury that I sustained from the ejection, from just the force of the ejection seat, also more so impacting the sound barrier with my body, just destroyed. I mean, my face looked like I had lost in 15-round fight with Mike Tyson. I was just beat to hell. My body was paralyzed. And I remember coming to and just, it was like waking up from a dream. I had no memory of the ejection. I was no idea I was even in a hospital. Like my brain function was so poor that I just thought I was in my bedroom. And for some reason, like there was new furniture and all my family and squadron mates were there for some reason. It was surreal almost like it was waking up from a dream, but still in a dream. And I remember eventually kind of starting to get a little bit more mental function as the wheels started turning. Although they had me loaded full of so many pain meds as well. That was only making me even more loopy. But I remember kind of looking around and my body was covered in this plastic wrap to protect is all this wound vac seal to protect from infection. My arms and legs were covered in these huge surgical scars, hundreds of staples and sutures. And I remember trying to move, and I thought that they had tied me down on the bed with this little thin, itchy wool blanket from the hospital. And what it was, I was paralyzed. And it kind of took a little while for that to sink in. I've got patches of wires all stuck all over me, monitoring my vitals. It was a relief to see everybody there, but I was still really confused as to why is everybody in my bedroom, like waking me up. And as the wheels started spinning again, eventually the medical staff came in and they said, "You've been in a high speed ejection. You're, you're likely never going to be able to walk again. Your arms are no longer going to work, and your military flying career is over." And I think they were just trying to be real with me. But in the back of my mind, the first thing I thought was, fuck that. I'm gonna prove you wrong. I'm not gonna be stuck in a state like this the rest of my life. And I started to just visualize Like, what's it gonna be like to come back into this hospital in my flight suit with my wings on my chest and be like, I'm back flying. And at this opportunity, I could have chose either path. I could have bit off on, I'm paralyzed. I'm never going to walk again. My life is in ruins. I just crashed a jet. How much responsibility do I owe to that? There's going to be a huge investigation that's going to tear my life apart. Like, I had every reason in that moment to just go into this drug induced place that so many people do, especially with opiates and the pain meds they were giving me. I could have just easily just buried myself in all that, and I wouldn't be here telling this story if I did. But instead, I had this little tiny ember of hope. And that's what I made the conscious decision to feed. And I didn't know what I was doing at that point, and I couldn't have described it even then. But now looking back at it, I made the choice to cultivate that little ember, to feed that little fire and help it grow. And the more I fed that little fire, the more I visualized, the more I saw myself back in the cockpit, and the more I worked towards that goal with discipline and consistency of just waking up in the morning and being like, okay, I can't move, but what can I do today? Can I wiggle something? And started sending those messages to my nervous system. And little by little, things started to work again. But it was because that was the ember that I was feeding instead of that darkness. And I think that was a really pivotal moment in my recovery, was just that mindset shift right in that moment. But I think that can apply to so many people.
100%, 100%. And I know from experience now, mine was nothing like yours, but I went completely deaf in my left ear, and they don't know why. And I remember when they walked in with the box of tissues and they said, you lost your hearing, and I'm like, well, how I get back? And they're like, you can't get it back. And I'm like, I'm getting it back, right? And there was just this little spark of, I'm going to fight back to get this, because in my mind, it was like miracles happen every day. So why can't I be that miracle, right? But there were some really low points that I had to fight. Really, it's just like I had to fight the reality versus what I was feeding myself and that mind. Because in the reality, no matter how many doctors I saw, they all said the same thing, right?
Okay.
And no matter how many hearing tests I took, they all said the same thing, right? And I was like, something has to work. And I got to a point where I regained a majority of my hearing, which shocked everybody. But
Nice.
how do you deal with, I know how I dealt with those low moments and stuff. I want to know how you dealt with those low moments as you're battling injury. Not only that, but it's very different than me, because you have drugs in your system, like you have all this like medication and all this other stuff. You have the terrors that you were talking about. Like, what is the mindset shift that helps pull you out of that dark place, especially when, like you said, the doctors are kind of giving you that reality, but it's a reality that you don't want to take in. And sometimes, as you mentioned, though, it's easier to, you didn't mention this part, but you said I could have went two different ways. And sometimes it's just easier to accept. Like, it's easier to be like, okay, I get it. Like, and then I'm gonna like for myself, like, I'm never gonna hear again. That's it, right? I'm never gonna walk again. That's it, right? But to fight that, you're also not only fighting, you know, what's the reality, but then you're also fighting the experts, right?
Mhm.
And then
Oh,
all
yeah.
the people, and sometimes your family is trying to shield you. They might be like, well, maybe you should, instead of being like, no, let me keep going. So talk to me about your mindset during these low points and stuff.
Yeah, I mean, there's a really good saying I've heard other people say, and that's when you have a doctor come in and tell you something, you should believe the diagnosis. Yeah, I have hearing loss, or yeah, I am paralyzed, but don't believe the prognosis. You know, this is just statistical nonsense, and you really get to have a huge part in that recovery and become the minority of your recovery based on your mindset. And there's only so much that you can overcome. If you have certain levels of injury, your arms and legs have been cut off, you're not going to like grow new arms and legs, but there is a lot that can be done simply by staying optimistic and staying focused on your goal. And the way I really dealt with it was, instead of kind of biting off on this overwhelming anxiety and fear and everything that I could have, I really just focused on what can I do in this moment. And I didn't realize it at that time, but that was like a mindset thing that, like, this is what meditating is all about, is being in the present moment and just living in the moment. And that's what I did unknowingly and without really any coaching. I just found that if I just focused on what I could do in that moment of therapy, okay, we're doing speech therapy today. I'm going to pour everything I can into that. Okay, we're doing vision therapy today. I'm going to focus on that little stick as hard as I can and rebuild my eyes. And that's what I really focused on. And I poured myself, my attention, and my energy into just, all right, what can I do right now and recover? And those little consistent efforts at that and having that mindset of I'm going to get better, I'm going to figure this out, I'm going to be that miracle. That was really what drove me through. And it wasn't, every day wasn't a good day. Every day wasn't progress. There was a lot of false backwards and dark times throughout, but I consistently got back up and I said, okay, I want to start walking forward. Okay, I screwed up yesterday. I went into a dark place. I beat myself up. I'm not doing that today. I'm going to step forward again. I'm going to climb back out of that hole. And just having that mindset, like, you can't keep me down. And like I'm going to prove you all wrong, was really powerful for me. I think that was something that came from my childhood. I was always like a sort of a runty, nerdy kid, and I got picked on a lot and beat up and got in fights. And I think I always had this sort of underdog fighting spirit that was cultivated at a very young age of like, fuck you guys, you can't tell me what I can and can't do based on who you think I am. And I started to see that that was sort of like a superpower that got me through a lot in my life, especially with this.
This podcast episode is brought to you by Thrivers Coffee. Podcast guest Nick McKinley's company, Deliver Fund, brings you guys Thrivers Coffee. It is ethically sourced, it's organic, and it supports traffic survivors. That is right. Thrivers Coffee is all about empowering us to making a difference in the fight to end human trafficking. That's why 100% of the proceeds go directly towards their goal of bringing freedom to victims of human trafficking. So if you guys love coffee that is organic, ethically sourced, and tastes absolutely delicious, and want to help to end the fight of human trafficking, check out Nick McKinley's company, Thrivers Coffee. You had to like surprise people, because I just know for myself, like when I showed the paper, when I took my last hearing test and it showed that I had not only just a little bit of hearing, like an enormous amount of hearing, they didn't believe, it was a different like place. They didn't believe me that I had zero. They were like, that's not possible. This never happens, right? For yourself, like, did you notice like the spirit of the team that you were with when you started to do things that they told you originally were impossible, or that that weren't realistic? And then did that also shift, like in terms of their attitude, I guess? And I don't mean like attitude in like a mean way, but just their, maybe again, doctors are more like, they tell it, they're realistic, it's based off a statistic, like you just said, don't think about the prognosis. Did their prognosis change, and did that give you even more hope to really like, believe, keep believing?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the support that I got wasn't really coming from the medical team. I mean, oftentimes they were just so busy and bogged down that I didn't really get much interaction with them. I got to interact with the therapists, and they were just really stoked to have me because I was so ambitious to get better and work towards the goal, which I think a lot of people get into that situation, and understandably, they just kind of give up and they don't want to put the effort into the therapy, which only makes their chances even slimmer when you're just not even putting in the effort. So there was a lot of support from the therapist, seeing that I was very involved and dedicated to this. And I had a mindset. I remember probably one of the biggest ones was when I was seeing the psychologist, who's like seeing my mental processes taking place and understanding like, okay, this guy's got some serious mental fortitude that is driving him forward. And he was really kind of the first physician, I think, that really was like in awe, like, wow, you've got something going on in your mind that is really powerful. And I don't think the medical community even understands it. Maybe nobody does, but there is something going on. I mean, beyond our five senses, that you can call it the quantum field, divinity, God, whatever that is to you. But there is something far beyond the power of just this physical world of matter that's around us that we perceive with our five senses. There's something happening much deeper. And you can access that through your mindset. And that's really what I found that I could unlock was visualization and positive energy towards myself and self-love. And that cultivated this healing environment within me, regardless of what was going on outside and the statistics and all the naysaying. But as time progressed, there was a huge transformation. And it took years. It took 2 years in total before, I kind of had my body and mind back. And through that, I had dark times. I had plenty of times where I was taking a bunch of oxy and drinking it down with scotch and like just melting into the ground. And I remember kind of laying there on this beach chair outside as I'm just kind of melting into the ground from all the oxy and everything. And I was just like, I could stay here forever. And I can see how so many people get tempted into it because it's just like bliss. And you're
Mhm.
just so at ease and so peaceful. But I came to realize like this is artificial, and this isn't who I want to be the rest of my life. And fortunately, even with those times, I was able to climb back out of that. And where it took a lot of fortitude, especially, was getting off all of these pain meds. I mean, I was on so much shit for pain management, from amitriptyline, tramadol, trazodone, oxycodone, oxycontin, and massive doses of gabapentin, which was supposed to be a safer alternative that was freaking devastating and the hardest thing that I had to wean myself off of, by the way. More difficult, I thought, than the oxy. Through applying that same consistent discipline that I did through my physical recovery in order to get off the medications, I just did little by little. And it wasn't always big steps and it wasn't always forward, but that was kind of my goal that I kept working for. And over the course of 2 years, after more surgeries, I had overcome paralysis, I had overcome prescription drug addiction, and I had overcome the whole investigation process to earn the right to go back to the cockpit. And, kind of miraculously, I was able to max out the Navy's physical fitness test again. I was literally running circles around the people at my command, and people are like, "Holy shit, like, how is this guy back?" I had so much support from the strike fighter community through it because they saw it. It was like the story of Rudy, like this underdog that, there's no way that they could do what they did, but it really had a positive impact, not just on me, but on the strike fighter community to see me back at it.
I want to talk about the healthcare system because it's so
Oh
broken,
yeah.
and you talk so much about like the drugs that you're on, and it's like, well, they put me on that. It's not even like I did it, myself, and that
Right.
harmful treatment and everything like that, and you know, and getting off of it too. Um, what what advice do you have for not just veterans, but anybody that's like stuck in this healthcare system of like drugs, and all this other stuff that isn't helping them or that they're so dependent on. So like they think that it is helping them. Like I have family members that are like, you know, that have been on stuff for so long and that just getting off of it obviously not only just affects you, but also they feel like it's a need. Like when they're off
Yeah.
of it, it's like, well, that was actually helping me. Like, no, so talk to us about that.
It's tough to go against what the physicians are saying. You
Hmm.
trust these people. They've got lab coats and fancy degrees, and they're supposed to be the experts on all of this. But what I came to see, through firsthand experience was that the medical system is not designed to be ideal for the patient. It's not designed to heal you ideally. It's designed as a business model. And the business model of that pharmaceutical system, especially, and this goes for all of conventional healthcare, be it the VA or elsewhere with mainstream insurance, is all built around this for-profit model, which is get people on a drug that they need to continue to take for the rest of their lives. It's not going to really cure you. It may mask your symptoms temporarily. And really, the way the physicians are trained, I don't think many of them even realize it, but they've been indoctrinated into a system that causes them to be basically drug pushers. And I think more and more physicians are starting to see this, and a lot of them are frustrated being trapped in that system. I have a friend who's an ER doc, and it's like this is not what I signed up for, and it's only getting worse. With all these corporate takeovers of hospitals, and it's become this like money making machine, and that's the goal of it. It's not to help fix people, but once you start to see that those medicines are not designed to help fix you. They're designed to keep you addicted and coming back for more and making more medical appointments. And it can get you on this freaking hamster wheel where you're running and doing all this stuff and spending all this money and time and effort, and you're not getting any better. And oftentimes you end up worse. And then you need more medications and more medications. And you get sucked into this freaking vortex that is the conventional healthcare system in the Western world today that is failing people abysmally. And it's tough to resist it with these people that are supposed to be the experts. But when you kind of see what's really going on, like I learned the hard way, was that stuff doesn't help you. And even when I was like, I want to get off this, and I went and talked to the pain management team and said, I will figure out the pain part of this. I don't need to be on all this. They're like, oh, well, you're feeling no pain because of the medication regime you're on is working. And it was just like, they are so well trained. I don't even think they realize that they're trained to just keep you on this stuff. So you kind of have to fight against that, and you kind of have to urge them. And if they're not going to cooperate with you, what I had to do is just figure it out my own, which maybe isn't the safest thing, but you know what? We have an obsession with safety in our culture right now that is crushing us and has become detrimental and used as an excuse to control you. So sometimes, yeah, you do have to break what's maybe the safest thing you can do in order to move forward in your life. And I took the steps to slowly wean myself off of those medications one at a time, very methodically, and I just kind of did it by feel. I started with some of the less potent ones. I started with, I think, the amitriptyline initially, and then the tramadol, and I would just take a little bit less each day, and I would just notice how I felt. You know, I started to feel really sick and nauseous, or started to have really bad pain or something. I would slowly increase the medication, and I just kind of did that, each one individually, until eventually I was down to just gabapentin. I thought the oxycodone was going to be the hardest one, but within a few months, I was able to wean myself off of that medication just by
Well,
being consistent little by little and just feeling my body. And then I got to the gabapentin, and that one was awful to get off. I was up at 2,400 milligrams a day of that stuff, which was an absurd amount of medication to be taken with that kind of medicine. And I slowly just had to, over months and months and months of feeling sick and nauseous and nervous and just completely clouded mentally, like almost incapable of doing much anything, I got off of it. But it was just that same consistent discipline with the goal in mind. And it wasn't always, again, it wasn't always steps forward. There were days that, you know, I was like, oh man, I just need more of it. And I would take a bunch, and then I'd be back 10 steps or 10 days. But that was that same mentality of just working at it little by little, and trusting yourself, like relearning to trust yourself, and your intuition was a huge part of it.
it is so challenging in terms of like, I am, like, I'm the advocate for myself, right? We're all our advocates for ourselves, right? But like, I am my own health advisor in a way.
Oh
I
yeah.
go out, I do the research, I figure things out. But it is really challenging. I didn't go to medical school. I didn't, study all this stuff. I'm studying on my own, right? But what does that mean? I have to really trust myself and trust what I'm
Yeah.
learning and all this stuff. And it is really challenging to go through go against what they're saying to you when they're the known experts, right?
Yeah.
And then you wonder, like, well, if I went that way, would this happen or all this? Like, am I doing the right thing for me? And essentially, only you can make that choice. But, did you have doubts throughout the way? And how do you combat those doubts to know that, like, what you were doing for yourself was in your best interest?
Yeah, it was challenging, especially with the authority that is the medical profession, and not fully understanding it as deeply as I do now. There was always this worry, like, am I gonna cause a seizure? Am I gonna, like, end up dead because I'm weaning myself off of this stuff? And I really had to trust myself. It can be difficult to go against what the expert or so-called experts are saying. And I'm not saying, oh, there's a lot of really good physicians out there. I owe my life to some very skilled surgeons. And I think when it comes to trauma care in our Western medical system, it's phenomenal. Like if
Mhm.
you've been blown up or broken in a car accident and you need to be put back together again, there's no better place to be on the planet than here in our healthcare system. But it's all the chronic health conditions and the aftercare and that, especially the mental health system, which we haven't even gotten into. But in those realms of medicine, there's a lot of flaws. A big one is there's an outstanding book out there. It's called "Sickening: How Big Pharma Broke American Healthcare and How We Can Fix It" by Dr. John Abramson. And that goes on a deep dive of the way that our research system has been corrupted by the pharmaceutical industry. And when they research these drugs, it's often funded by the very pharmaceutical maker that made the drug. And they obviously have a very much a conflict of interest in that study being positive. And you would assume that in order to become a double-blind, placebo-tested, peer-reviewed article in a medical journal that's talking about how great this stuff is, to telling all the doctors what the next best medicine is, that it's this perfect system, but it's just not. The pharmaceutical industry essentially gets to referee their own studies. While they'll do a full study, they get to select an analysis of what data is taken from that study to use for the peer review. So the peer review process doesn't look at the entire study. They just look at whatever the pharmaceutical company cherry picked out of the study that they want to present for peer review. And what that causes, they've been caught doing it, they've gotten in trouble, but the fines are so tiny in comparison to the profit of getting these drugs out there that it's just a slap on the wrist for them. When you're making billions of dollars off of something, a few $100,000 or millions of dollars of fines is like, it's just the cost of doing business. And unfortunately, that continues into the day. And what's happening is these medical journals that are getting pushed out to the physicians as gospel are flawed. And most of the physicians, I don't think realize it, that this is just, there's human error in it. And I think most of the medical professionals out there, and I even think most of the people that work at a pharmaceutical company have good intentions, but there's some serious corruption within it that's broken the system. And so now realizing that, I realize how important it is for you to take your health into your own hands. You have to be the captain of your own ship as you go through your health struggles. And really, for chronic conditions, it needs lifestyle changes. It needs you to take control of your life and enact healthier choices. Prioritizing your sleep is probably the most foundational, important part of healing from anything. And we live in a society that doesn't really value rest. We're constantly going. We're all about working hard and charging hard and having 10 hobbies and being super fit and like doing ultra distance runs. Like, we live in a society and a culture that doesn't really value just stillness and rest. But that's probably the most important part of healing, especially if you're experiencing some sort of chronic health issue, is just prioritizing your health, prioritizing your rest and your sleep, and rebuilding that sleep. There's an outstanding book out there. It's called Why We Sleep by Dr. Matthew Walker. And it goes on a deep dive into just how vital sleep is for everything in our life, from our physicality to our mental health, and everything in between. And then some really common things that we do to ourselves that crush our restful sleep and take a toll on us, especially over the years. And some big ones that you can easily take out of your life are reducing and eliminating alcohol consumption. Crushes our sleep. Even if you're just having a drink or two, you're not doing yourselves any favors. And that was a really difficult one for me, coming from the drinking culture of fighter aviation. There's some long history steeped in alcohol, and we had some great times. But the more of that you can wean yourself off of and reduce and even eliminate completely, the healthier you will be, the better your sleep. And it has a profound impact on everything related to your health when you can get off the alcohol. Same thing goes for caffeine even. It's kind of such a part of our culture and drinking coffee. I love coffee. I love the taste of it, but it's like, even just a cup of coffee in the morning, the half-life of that caffeine in your system is 12 hours. So you can be late into the night and that caffeine will still be active in your body, and it's preventing you from getting deep, restful sleep. And you might not notice it. You might say, oh, I fall asleep fine. Well, you're not getting deep rest if you have caffeine in your system. That is a potent stimulant. The same goes for nicotine. The same goes for so many of these pharmaceutical drugs, is they impair your body's ability to get into deep, restful sleep. When you can start to address that, when you can start to put up, if you need to, dark curtains, if you need to wear a blindfold, if you need to sanitize your sleeping space so that you're not getting interrupted and you have darkness, not being on your phone or laptop late into the night staring at a blue screen can drastically improve your sleep. Just getting out in the morning for a walk for 15 minutes outside not only gets you some exercise and fresh air and connection with nature, but it exposes you to that sunlight in the morning, which is vital for setting your circadian rhythm. Drastically can improve your sleep. I know I'm throwing a lot at people, but if you can take little steps in a positive direction and start to educate yourself on these very simple things, it has a profound effect. And I would say the next big step after the sleeping is focusing on your nutrition and your hydration. You know, in our country is unfortunately just we have a food system that's just as broken, if not more broken, than our healthcare system. And hey, by the way, it's run and owned by the same people that are profiting off the medications that they get to prescribe you when you're sick from the food that's making you fall apart. I'd say 95% of the food at most grocery stores is freaking garbage that is depleting your nutrients. And so you really have to relearn to eat. And it's not a diet, it's not calorie restriction that I'm talking about. But just by shifting to eating real food, plants that are grown out of healthy, nutritious soil and not doused with herbicides and pesticides, coated in glyphosate that poisons you from the inside out, killing the gut microbiome that so drastically impacts your gene expression, who you are, the healthy version of yourself. If you're eating stuff that's full of poison and you think maybe, hey, well, I wash my produce, you know, I'm getting most of that off. Even a little bit of this stuff is poisoning you and it gets into the food, even if you wash it. And another thing is when you're dousing the soil in these herbicides and pesticides, it's killing all the microorganisms in the soil. And so the very things that we eat the plants for to help us with and get these essential amino acids and things that our body can't produce by itself, we're instead getting completely nutrient void. It may look like an apple. It may be the biggest apple you ever seen. Like everything that's being genetically altered now is like massive and it tastes sweet, but you'd have to eat 5 or 6 of our apples nowadays to get the nutrients that you would have gotten out of one little apple back in the 1950s because our soils are so depleted that are being used for industrial agriculture. And the food that we even eat, I mean, the animals that are confined don't see sunlight. They're eating grain that their digestive system isn't designed to handle because it's cheap and it makes them get big quick so they can slaughter them faster, that are pumped full of antibiotics. If you're eating a sick animal with that fat composition that's completely unnatural, it will make you sick. And you know, you can eat a 100% grass-fed beef or wild game, and the fat content in that is nourishing and gives your body vitality. But if you're eating that same animal that's been raised in a shitty environment, as so many of our industrial processed animals are, it's poisoning you. It completely changes everything. Instead of getting a balance of omega-3 and omega-6 fats, you're just getting all these omega-6s and there's so much more to it. But if you eat stuff that's sick and grown in sick soil, it's gonna make you sick. And that's what I think we're seeing, is even the things that should be nutrient dense and healthy for us, and even all the things that are dressed up to look like healthy foods, are oftentimes just full of garbage. You pick up a loaf of bread. I'm not just talking like junk foods. Like we know like the Cheetos and the chips and the cookies and stuff like that aren't going to be good for you, but it's way beyond that. It's all like the staples that people are buying at the store that you would assume is more of a healthy food. But if you pick up a loaf of bread and it's got 30 ingredients, half of which you cannot pronounce because they're not real things, they're artificially synthesized crap, that's going to poison you. So turning your diet towards a whole foods approach where you're going to local farmers markets if you can access them is a great place to go. Talk to the farmer, ask them, how do you grow this? Where is your soil? Go visit the farm and you'll be amazed at how many small farmers are popping up. There's kind of a resurgence of this regenerative agriculture, organic farming coming back. Even the USDA organic label has really been corrupted, and it may be better than the conventional produce still, but you know, the industries really have been doing everything they can to whittle down what that organic label means so they can slap it on and make more money off of their foods. And we could talk about nutrition all day, but that's a really important place to start.
You know, you said too about sleep, and I find it so funny because the hospital, the last thing they do is prioritize sleep because they're
Oh
waking you
yeah.
up every 5
Oh
seconds.
yeah.
And I remember when my dad was in the hospital, I think, I don't know, 2 or 3 years ago, and he was like, couldn't wait to get out just to get a good night's sleep. He's like, I don't know how anyone could get better in this hospital because every 2 hours they're coming
Oh
in. And
yeah.
then the worst thing is they come in at night. And he's like, that should be my sleep. Wake, come up in the daytime. They leave me alone. I'd like, don't leave me alone in the daytime. I'm awake, like, let me get my sleep. And it's mind blowing to me. And then when you do finally like get like a nap in, like you mentioned, like, it's daytime in the hospital. The lights are on. It's like, it's
Mhm.
it's a different environment as opposed to like me getting a nice restful sleep where I'm supposed
Yeah.
to. And I just find that so interesting. But like you said, it's this giant loop. And, I'm always so blown away and baffled. I mean, I kind of like am just like in awe of the fact that they've created this business that we are a slave to. And I mean, it's I mean, what's the best word for me? I mean, it's pretty impressive. Okay, is really what the word is. But the thing is, like, we buy into it. I mean, look at what happened. What 4 or 5 years ago, right?
Oh
It's like
yeah.
we buy
Disaster.
into the craziness. And I was just talking to a guest that was on the show um the other day where I said, how nuts was the world? And I said, but the fact is that people buy it because the experts are talking about it. And if anything, now today we're learning that like, well, we need to be questioning these experts, right? And
Oh yeah.
and you're right about all this. And I mean, I could talk about food and healthcare all day. But I want to talk about another thing in the same realm, kind of, but that doesn't really get talked about a lot, and that's psychedelic therapy.
Yeah.
And that played a big part in your recovery. And I want to know, like, how did you embrace that unconventional treatment? And and how did that aid in your healing? Because again, like something that they're not making money off of, they're shutting down and they're saying it doesn't help. Now, how do you be so open to that, and how did that aid in your healing?
Yeah, it had a profound impact on my healing journey. I had made this physical recovery. After the ejection, I went back to flying Super Hornets and I was kind of back on top of the world. And that's where the sort of happy ending Disney version of the story would be. But I then later experienced years of struggle with mental health that led to my medical retirement from the military. And I found myself dealing with a much more difficult challenge, which was dealing with mental health issues, a PTSD diagnoses, and the sort of misunderstanding that PTSD is really just symptoms of brain injury, dysfunction in our brain. I spent years of struggle. I ended up living in a mental hospital run by the VA that was all this stuff we're talking about with the healthcare system and not sleeping and just pumping you full of drugs and shitty food that makes you sicker. It was abysmal. And I found myself in a really dark place where I was eventually got out of that facility. I was just a broken human being. And I knew that the conventional system had loaded me up on so many drugs once again for this mental health issue. And I was just getting worse. And it was the same insanity that happened with the pain meds, which was like, oh, the med's not working. That means you need more of it. So here, take more. Meanwhile, the side effects get worse. And now you need all these meds to counter effect the side effects. And next thing you know, you're just back in that freaking sickness vortex that's going to profit off of you all the way to your death, as prolonged as it can possibly be. And a miserable place to be that so many people in our country and around the world are trapped in that system. But something that was a huge change of course for me was accessing psychedelic assisted therapy. I managed to stumble across the book called How to Change Your Mind by Michael Pollan. And that talks about the use of psychedelics or indigenous medicines, it's also called, or entheogens, or whatever your preferred nomenclature, uh, for healing trauma and mental health issues. And, there was a ton of apprehension, people around me, my family, especially the VA psychiatry team, they're like, that's the last thing a guy that's dealing with psychoses needs is to go take some psychotic, go on a trip. And there's a lot of fear mongering and
Yeah.
stigma around these indigenous medicines.
But that's how
But
they get you, though. Like the
Mhm.
fear mongering. That's how they all. I mean, it's all works that way. The food industry, the Pharmaceutical
Oh,
industry,
yeah.
politics. In order for you to get what they want, they have to fear you, and that's their win right there.
Once you experience these medicines, and I'm not saying it's for everybody, and you don't want to just jump into it without preparation and integration on the backside with medicine that you don't know where it came from without the proper dose. It's got to be done correctly. But when they're done in the proper way, these medicines are maybe some of the most promising tools for healing the human body, spirit, and mind that there are. And what I experienced initially was I found a local guide and I had a psilocybin ceremony with psilocybin mushrooms, which are kind of a more mellow version of psychedelics. They're still very powerful, but in comparison to some, they're kind of like a good entry point that are pretty accessible. And, I'm not telling you to go out and break the law, but, if you're not allowed to ingest a plant that grows or a fungi that grows in your backyard that's going to help heal you, we're kind of in some dark times and the rules are broken and the system's broken. So you kind of have to be a little bit of a rebel in this system unless
Yeah.
you have the money to travel outside the country that so many people are kind of being forced to do to keep it on the up and up. But what that did for me, use Michael Pollan's analogy from How to Change Your Mind, I experienced it. It's a perfect analogy for it, but it was like a fresh snowfall over all these ruts of negative emotions and behaviors that had become who I was. I was just living in this dark, seething anger with betrayal and resentment, and just, I was in a bad place. And that was all I could experience. And those neural pathways had just been reinforced and reinforced and reinforced. But what that medicine, the psilocybin helped me see was like, I don't have to be that anymore. And you get a fresh view from the top of that mountain with this fresh snowfall. And now you get to take a clean line down on your skis or your snowboard or whatever you're into, and take a new path and become a new version of yourself. And then when you can take that and you can start to rebuild new habits in your integration process, you can have profound positive impact. It's like hitting the reset button for who you are and then becoming the best version of yourself you've ever been. And over the course of years, I was fortunate to get access largely through veteran nonprofit organizations, traumatic brain injury clinics, customized nutraceuticals, and lab work that actually went in and saw where the physiology of my mind was off and addressed those issues directly instead of just talking about, oh, how do you feel today? In like this weird world of talking about our emotions that doesn't necessarily help fix the underlying hardware that's broken. And
Mhm.
once I started to fix the hardware in conjunction with the psychedelics, I got to go down to Peru with Heroic Hearts Project and experience ayahuasca. And that was an even deeper dive and bigger eye opener than the psilocybin had been. Not only do they sort of reset your system to give you a chance to like just start anew, they connected me to something I wasn't even looking for. And it really connected me deeply to something. You could call it spiritual, you could call it God. I'm not here to tell you what to believe, but you get to experience that realm firsthand. And it has a profound effect on your perspective of everything that changed my life for the better. It was like I had this just calloused armor built up over my heart and my emotions for so long of just trapping everything inside me. And that finally burst away. And it was like I could feel again, I could breathe again, I could love again. And once I opened back up and came reconnected to this field of divinity and love that connects all of us. And again, these are imprecise ways to describe it. These are the ineffable. This is something beyond human perception, logic, that's out there, that's very real. And all these different religions and spiritual beliefs and even quantum physics are trying to comprehend and understand it. But we're so simple creatures that we cannot understand the complexity of the infinite that is divinity or whatever you want to call that. But
Mhm.
it gives you a glimpse into that world beyond the perception that we normally have, beyond our five senses. You get to experience it firsthand through these indigenous medicines. And that is incredibly powerful in itself. These indigenous medicines also have been shown in studies, especially with ibogaine and psilocybin. They've shown that, and I think it really applies to a lot of these types of medicines, but they help cause rapid neuroregeneration. They help your brain and nervous system repair and restore. It resets the dopamine system so that you're no longer a slave to addictions, whatever those may be, your social media accounts, your news, your freaking alcohol, drugs, whatever it is, whatever your thing is, it resets that so you're not just like stuck in this reflex mode, living by default. It resets what's called the default node network. So you're not just this person that's just living in this entrenched behavior. And you get a new opportunity to rebuild the most authentic version of yourself that you've ever been. And when you start to connect to that version of yourself and you start to rebuild it and you start to take these steps by improving your sleep, your food, drinking clean water that doesn't have a bunch of shit in it, getting outside, reconnecting to community through something you like to do, and reconnecting to nature, it's amazing the transformation that it can have. And it's, it's changed my life for the better. And I now look back at all this shit I've been through and I'm so thankful for it because those medicines also showed me like all of that happened to bring you to now, in this very moment that we are in now. And in every single moment of our life, we get to choose. Do we want to live in this world of fear and anger and frustration and just get bombarded by all the things that we think we have to do, like watch the news and watch social media and drink the alcohol and drink the coffee in the morning, and this just grind that so many people find themselves just trapped in, that's just making you sicker and less happy? And when you can see that you also, in every single moment, you can choose love, you can choose positivity, and you can take control of your action in every single moment. And it doesn't matter what's happened in the past. It doesn't matter if you spent 10 years digging yourself into a hole through your addictions or whatever struggles you're going through. In this moment right now, you can choose to look up and see that light and move towards it.
I have to ask this question then. With all that, and like, we're talking about mindset and healing and all that stuff. And then, you do what they say you can't, right? You can walk, you ran circles around with the PT, like all this stuff. What was going on in your mind when you got back in the cockpit? Was there like a mental battle from what you endured and went through to then, going back again and flying for the first time after that?
I'd been working so hard towards that goal and visualizing it, and like I needed to get back on the horse that bucked me off.
Yeah.
And there was definitely, as soon as I got word that I was going to class up, like, and I was going to go back flying, like that day, like we're getting at it. I had like very little warning that was actually going to happen until the day of. But I was initially kind of like, holy shit, this is happening now. And there was a little bit of nerves, like, wow, like what's it going to be like going back flying? I haven't flown in 2 years. Am I still going to be able to do this for real? But I had so much excitement from years of just working towards that goal. It was like a huge sense of relief. And after I'd done like some refresher training in the simulator, some more ground schools to refresh on all the systems and emergency procedures. And then when I actually got to get back in the jet and go fly, one of the first things I did on that first solo was I went out to that same area of airspace over the Atlantic in almost the exact same spot. And I rolled the jet inverted and I dove the jet down, which was the same maneuver that I was doing when I ejected. And I was wondering, like, what's it going to be like? Am I going to be diving at that ocean? I'm going to get flashbacks and I'm going to become non-functional, but it was all good. I pulled through, I came through the bottom of it and all was good. There was definitely, I was a little more cautious than I had been before. I had a deeper respect for how dangerous that job could be, but I was so excited to be back.
I have 2 more questions for you. So
Sure.
that I definitely want to get in because I know it's an hour show. I could talk to you all day. And these 2 I definitely want to get in for you. Because you mentioned you had to medically retire because of mental, right?
Mhm.
So how did you find that new sense of purpose again? Because from what I'm hearing, and I could be wrong from the interview, is that it sounded like, you didn't get to go out on your terms. It was kind of like, I had to go out, right?
Yeah.
So how did you find this new identity, this new sense of
Mhm.
purpose? And what is that for you?
As this mental health struggle got worse and worse with the conventional treatments, it was, I felt like a massive failure. I was losing my job. I was losing this thing that I had worked out for years. I had been doing it for 13 years. I had been in the world of aviation. Being a pilot was who I was. It was my identity. And to lose all of that because of something at that point they were kind of describing to me was just this emotional thing going on. It was so frustrating. Really, there was this underlying physiology of my brain was in chaos, and that wasn't being addressed, but exacerbated. But at the time, I thought it was just like, why can't I just get over this? And so I had a hard time. I became suicidal and went to some very dark places for years because of losing that. But again, these medicines, these indigenous medicines, they reconnected me to purpose. They showed me that I had been through all of that hardship because I could handle it and because it was going to help bring me to this moment to share this story. And the big calling that I got through it all was I need to share what I've been through. And so I decided to write a book, Phoenix Revival, to share the story. I've been going on tons of different podcasts to share this story. You know, I've been a motivational speaker now for about 2.5 years. So I travel all over the country and all sorts of venues to speak to corporate events, mastermind retreats, nonprofit fundraisers, universities, high schools, and everything in between. Everybody I've met with and talked to, this really resonates with the huge audience. But I found that this is something that needs to be talked about from a firsthand perspective, not just some study-based nonsense or, you know, this is experience that I think most people that have gone through this kind of stuff, especially people that have had to go into the mental health world, they don't get to talk about it anymore. They don't have the ability to articulate this. And I know it needs to be talked about so that we can start to fix the system. You know, the first step to fixing a problem is admit that there is one. And I want this to paint the picture, not to tear the VA down or destroy the conventional healthcare system, but let's take some steps to make it better. We have the ability to make it better, but there's a lot of financial interest that we're going to have to overcome to change it. But I think by having the public awareness about that is a good first step. And then more importantly, I want this to be the biggest calling that I've had in my new purpose in life is I want to be that spark of light that I wish I had when I was in that darkness, when I was in that hopeless place, broken, being told I would never get better, that my only option was just to take more pills and be miserable and just be happy I'm alive. It doesn't have to be like that. I don't know what people are going through. We all go through our traumas. You don't have to have been blown up in an ejection. You don't have to have been in a combat environment to experience struggles in life. It's part of our human condition. But realize when you can get through those and rebuild yourself and pick yourself back up, it's going to allow you to become an even better version of yourself. The greater the hardships we experience, the greater the ability that we have to rise even higher.
Before I get to the final question, can you share with us your book and tell us about it?
I don't know if you do video, but this is Phoenix Revival. It's the aftermath of naval aviation's fastest survived ejection. My friend Bryce did the artwork on the cover. He's a former Green Beret and a really talented artist. He took a digital image of me and my gear and was able to paint it. And then the publishing company was able to enhance the background with the cool psychedelic kind of imagery. It took initially about 9 months to write the first version of the manuscript, but it was just sitting down. I wasn't a writer, you know, I'd never written a book before. I wasn't even a great English student, but I was like, this is something I just need to write down. And I just kind of figured it out as I went. I kind of just brain dumped over the course of 9 months, telling my story chronologically of like what all had happened. Spent another year or two just redesigning it, rebuilding it, improving the writing, figuring out the publishing process, which was, I think, even more challenging than writing the book, was just figuring out how to get it out to the world. But here it is, about 3 or so years after I started writing it. It just released into January, and now you can get it on Amazon, hardcover, paperback, ebook, and on Audible. It's a reality, and I hope it can really help inspire people. And it also has a lot of practical tools in it that we kind of brushed on, which are ways that you can improve your own health. But you just got to take the helm back into control, and you get that choice in any given moment.
So what do you recommend for us, to all the listeners out there, like to help take that first step forward? Like, what's the mindset shift that you recommend to help us take one step forward to, you know, when life is really challenging us?
You just got to dig within yourself and find that little ember of hope. And no matter how small it is, you got to realize the power of that little tiny, even if it's just a little tiny spark. And maybe this story that I'm telling you will be a spark for you. But if you can get that spark going and realize that if you cultivate it, you can overcome immense challenge. The human spirit has the ability to endure immense hardship and realize the darker the place that you have been, it really can allow you to overcome more and become an even more powerful, strong version of the human that you can, the best version of yourself is awaiting you on the other side of whatever hardship you face. There's a quote I really love by Carl Jung, which is, in order to grow to reach the heavens, you must have roots that have been deep into hell. There's a lot of different ways of describing it. The yin and the yang, this relationship between the light and the dark, that is the human experience. Try to take that light and go with it and cultivate it. And realize that these challenges you may be facing, these are lessons. They're not a punishment. It's to help teach you something. And it doesn't always seem like that. It can be really easy to feel like you just want to, like, why is this happening to me? Why me? I didn't deserve this. Well, it's happening for your benefit. As crazy as that might sound, it's giving you the opportunity to overcome something and become the best version of yourself. So just try to find that light and cultivate that. And don't underestimate the power of your imagination. In our culture, we kind of dismiss the imagination as this fictional, made up thing, but there's great power in what you imagine and visualize and cultivate within your own mind. That's beyond, I think, most human understanding, but is incredibly powerful.
Thank you so much. Thanks for sitting down and chatting with me today. You were a pleasure, and I really believe our listeners are going to get a lot of that out of it. So thank you so much.
Thanks for having me, Gene, and I really appreciate these questions. They're really thoughtful.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. I really am excited to read your book. I'm really excited. I got to get that. And for anyone that's listening, like you mentioned, like there's a lot of practical takeaways. We just touched the surface on this interview. You know, the book really is going to give a deep dive. So I highly recommend checking that out. And don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, become a Substack member, because it's all free. And you're going to get some extra stuff that, only the subscribers get. And I guess that's it. Tune in next Wednesday. Thanks, guys.